Good afternoon, I'm KHOU meteorologist Chris Ramirez. We've had quite a bit of a development in the Gulf of Mexico as the National Hurricane Center now tracking Tropical Storm Milton. This has been upgraded to a tropical storm. It was Tropical Depression 14 about an hour ago. It's moving northeast at 3 miles an hour. We're seeing this system become more defined into that center of that low pressure system as it tracks off towards the northeast. So as we look at the forecasted track of this system, it is expected to be strengthening into a Category 1 hurricane by 7 p.m. on Sunday, eventually Category 2 hurricane by Monday evening, and eventually also impacting the Florida Peninsula as a possible Category 2 hurricane by the middle of next week. So Florida likely to be impacted by another hurricane, at least the second time in the past 2 weeks. So as we look at the spaghetti plots, models are still uncertain on an exact location, but they are in agreement that it is going to be heading off towards the east and towards the Florida Peninsula. How far north and south of that landfall impact is still the uncertain part, but it's something that folks in Florida really should be tracking at least in the next couple of days, or actually the next week or so, as potentially this could provide some possible stronger impacts than what we saw with Helene, as Tampa area likely to get the full blunt of a hurricane in the coming days. So as we look at future track, you might be asking yourself, why is this staying away from Texas? It's because next week we are going to be tracking a cold front that is going to be moving through the deep south. That's going to bring a dose of drier air in place. It's going to keep that system well south of us and keep that system off towards the east in the coming days by next Wednesday. So we're going to be high and dry here across Texas, but very unfortunate for the southeast U.S. as they are going to be impacted by another storm. Also, we're dealing with very warm waters in the Gulf of Mexico. Temperatures are in the upper 80s. It only takes water 85 degrees or higher to fuel that tropical development, and it is expected to be rather warm. So it has a lot of mileage to go to fuel that storm as it progresses through the Gulf of Mexico in the coming days. We also have two other named storms out in the Atlantic Ocean. We have Hurricane Kirk, which is a Category 3 hurricane, and then Hurricane Leslie. These systems are expected to remain over open water. Eventually, Kirk likely to form into a tropical depression, maybe a remnant low. It's going to bring some rainfall to Europe, and Leslie likely to take more of a similar path to Kirk. But we already crossed off Milton on the list. Now we have Nadine, which is next. So it's going to be interesting to see if we're going to get through more of these names for this hurricane season. But it's also an important reminder that hurricane season lasts until November 30th and begins once again next June of 2025. And as always, you can get the latest tropics update.
Said a possible interview maybe later.
In Nouméa, these burnt buildings are not the ravages of some natural disaster. They are what remain after last spring's deadly riots in the French overseas territory of New Caledonia. More than 800 businesses were damaged. This man barely managed to make it out of all the destruction. However, his factory has gone silent.
There's normally about 10 people on duty at a time. All the machines you see there would normally be on our customers' sites. Today they're here, so it's extremely frustrating.
His sales are set to fall from 7 to 3 million euros this year. The loss of 70% of his business forced him to lay off more than half of his workforce. He wonders if he can continue his business on the island.
Leaving is a possibility. Closing the company is also a possibility. The feeling is that it's a huge waste. As an entrepreneur, you only look at one thing, and that's value creation. We spend all our time creating value, and what we've seen is the destruction of value.
According to the local government, 24,000 people have found themselves out of work, approximately one-third of the private sector. Employment agencies have never seen such an influx of applicants. This woman is trying to find employment after the place where she worked at as an accountant was burned down.
So how has everything impacted you since May the 13th? Did you manage to speak with someone?
How do you see your future?
That's why I said I live day by day. I go to sleep at night, and then I say maybe tomorrow will bring a little more. Financially, I have always been independent.
This crisis, a result of the riots, came on top of an already existing problem. The nickel industry, the primary revenue source for New Caledonia, has been under threat. This factory that specializes in the processing of metals was forced to close. Faced with falling prices and increased global competition, the plant had to lay off 1,200 employees. Aurélie was among them.
So this is the uniform I wore every day to go on site. I still can't believe that I'm not going to wear it anymore.
This summer, she just finished building her new home, a few kilometers from the factory. But she is no longer able to repay the 176,000 euro loan she took out.
I know that I'll have to bounce back from this loan because I've made a commitment. So I have to follow through on that commitment to avoid foreclosure or something. Anything that had to do with industry or mining, there's nothing left. And we were brought up in this sector, where we got used to it, and the experience we've gained is in these sectors.
Following the factory's closing, the town has come to a standstill. In this shopping center, stores are closed, their windows are shuttered. The hospitality and tourism sector are also in freefall. On the south side of the island, over 1,200 residents face another problem on the other side of the roadblocks. In the Mont d'Or district, rioters have closed themselves off. We were able to access the area by boat, where a food distribution has been set up. Because of the blockades, people are unable to go to work, earn a wage, and are now struggling to feed their families.
There are people who never needed this, who today have run out of money to pay their bills and feed their families. What I'm anticipating 2 months from now, when there's no more partial, subsidized employment, and when there's real unemployment and the money runs out, there's going to be a real food crisis.
The crisis has already cost the archipelago 2 billion euros, according to local authorities. Although the French government has already paid out 400 million euros in aid, New Caledonia is sinking further into a historic crisis which will be difficult to overcome.
Time now for your evening rush. President Joe Biden made a surprise appearance in the White House briefing room today. This was actually the first time Biden stood at that podium during his presidency. He made a few brief remarks touching on different topics like the latest jobs numbers and about the upcoming election. Biden says the recent job report includes sincere information. Also, the president says he is confident in a free and fair election, but says he is unsure if a transition of power will be peaceful.
On oil prices, thank you. Iris Tao with NTD here. The crude oil prices rose by over 2% today after the latest Iranian attacks on Israel. Are you concerned about major oil supply disruptions affecting the U.S.? And do you think Americans are prepared for that? And also, secondly, on China, you mentioned China. Do you think China might be trying to seize this moment, to take advantage of this moment, try to plan an attack on Taiwan and Indo-Pacific theater? Thank you so much.
Well, you never know with President Xi. I had a great relationship, as you know, with President Xi. He's a very smart guy. So I don't want to read his mind, but he's very smart, and he has a way of doing things that's very good for China. And he's at the top of his game. Our people are not at the top of their game, so you never really know. I think that China is going to be a very interesting subject over the next couple of years. You know, China's having a lot of problems right now. You know, the economy is having some big problems. They just issued very big stimulus, but it's someplace. And he's a very, I mean, people get upset when I say it, but he's a very fierce person. He really is. He's a fierce warrior. He's a fierce challenger. But I had a very good relationship with him. Okay, a couple of more. Go ahead.
Israel's ground troops and Air Force continue to launch major strikes against Hezbollah. Their goal is to wipe out the terror group's presence in southern Lebanon.
At the same time, Israel's preparing to retaliate against Iran for the massive missile strike this week. One possibility, attacking Iran's oil facilities. Paul Strand brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Israeli jets are keeping up their strikes on Hezbollah in Beirut and its suburbs. One target was the terrorist group's intelligence headquarters, and one strike was meant to hit their reported new top leader as he met with other Hezbollah officers who have not already been taken out by other attacks. IDF troops in southern Lebanon are taking a heavy toll on Hezbollah fighters. The IDF estimates some 100 have been killed over the course of the last day. One of those was the Hezbollah officer responsible for the rocket attack that killed 12 children on a soccer field in the Druze community of Majd al-Shams this July. The IDF's main spokesman says Israeli troops are determined to wipe out Hezbollah's presence and extensive infrastructure located so close to Israel.
As part of our efforts to make sure that the residents of northern Israel can return to their home in safety and security without the threat of Hezbollah on their doorstep.
And Israel launched an airstrike in the West Bank aimed at the local Hamas leader. Palestinians say the bombing killed at least 18 people and injured many others. Hamas's popularity has surged in this region, right inside Israel's borders. Meanwhile, U.S. officials are working to get Israel to show restraint when it retaliates for Iran's massive assault with 180 missiles this week. President Biden admits the two allies are talking about Israel hitting Iran's oil facilities. Rumors of that have already sent oil prices higher as energy analysts worry aloud.
Looking at where the prices will go, definitely it depends on where the destruction would be and how much oil is going to be taken off the market.
A top official in the European Union is more worried about Israel attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. He insists the Jewish nation not launch such strikes, warning no one knows what kind of radioactive dangers could be unleashed blowing up such facilities.
These attacks are extremely dangerous and have a serious potential to create consequences on an incalculable scale.
10 members of the UN Security Council are going further, demanding all sides in this conflict stop the fighting now.
We condemn the current cycle of violence and call for an immediate end to all hostilities.
But the violence does go on. Yemen's Houthis keep blowing up ships that might have anything to do with Israel, like this British oil tanker attacked in the Red Sea Thursday. And Iran just released new video of what it says were its rockets roaring off to hit Israel this past Tuesday. It's a way to remind the Jewish nation Iran has hit it with massive missile barrages twice now and can certainly do it again. Paul Strand, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Just the missile barrages didn't land. Israel was able to defend itself and intercept every single one. I will remind the UN that you're at fault here. Back in 2006, Israel controlled southern Lebanon and did so for the purpose of making sure Hezbollah couldn't launch any more attacks against its sovereignty. And you failed at that. The UN has completely failed at that. There was supposed to be a weapons-free zone of southern Lebanon that UN troops were to enforce. It's quite clear they have completely failed at that. They've allowed these rocket launchers to be installed, these tunnels to be installed, for terror troops to be entrenched within the hills of southern Lebanon. And it all happened on their watch. Now, what nation is going to allow rockets to rain down on their civilians and not retaliate? It's absolutely absurd for the international community to condemn Israel in this and call for immediate ceasefires, and all of that be directed at Israel, and none of it directed at the controllers, whether it's Iran or Hezbollah or Hamas. They're all puppet states, or what the Houthis are doing. And can our State Department finally declare that they're a terrorist group? Under the Trump administration, that declaration was clear. Houthis are a terrorist group. Under the Biden administration, they removed that designation supposedly for humanitarian reasons. But here they are firing on international shipping. They're firing on U.S. Navy ships. Why in the world can we at least get the State Department to cooperate with our own Navy and protect our sailors? We need to enforce sanctions, embargoes. All of these things need to be brought to bear. But most importantly, we need to send a very clear message to all of the terror groups and to Iran. We stand with Israel.
Islamabad police fired tear gas on Friday as clashes erupted with the supporters of jailed former Prime Minister Imran Khan. The PTI supporters were holding an anti-government rally in the city. Officials have also sealed off Islamabad and blocked cell phone services to prevent the gathering. The city was put on a high alert amid a series of high-level diplomatic events which are to be held, including the visit of India's External Affairs Minister. Ahead of the demonstrations, Pakistan's government and other opposition parties urged the PTI to delay their protest by 2 weeks on account of foreign dignitaries in the capital. PTI chief Imran Khan reportedly relayed a message through a senior leader to postpone the demonstrations. However, the PTI founder responded that his party would put off the demonstrations if the government agreed to postpone the constitutional amendments till October 25th. The Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf party is taking to the streets for 2 days now to demand the release of party founder Imran Khan and also demonstrate against a slew of issues, which includes independence of judiciary. Party leaders and supporters have been met with heavy security and layers of barricading in the city. In the latest, Imran Khan's sisters, Alima Khan, has been arrested from D Chowk, which is the ground zero of these demonstrations in Pakistan.
Pakistan is deploying its army in Lahore in view of the opposition PTI party's call to hold a protest in the city. The local Punjab government has requested the deployment amidst rising concerns over the security of critical buildings. The Punjab government had sought army deployment in 6 districts of the province. The Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf had stated that it will hold its protest at the Lahore's iconic Minar-e-Pakistan. The army deployment in Lahore follows a similar deployment of the armed forces in Islamabad. The earlier authorities in Lahore had sealed off all roads leading to Minar-e-Pakistan, placing shipping containers at key access points, cutting off routes around the area. The PTI had selected 6 alternative locations across Lahore for the demonstrations, including the Data Darbar, the Ravi Bridge and the railway station. Now, earlier on Friday, the federal government had called in the army troops in Islamabad ahead of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit and several high-profile visits later this month in the wake of the protest calls given by Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. The decision to call in the army came on the heels of a complete lockdown of the twin cities because of the PTI's planned protest at D-Chowk right in front of the parliament in the red zone, with Khyber Pakhtunkhwa's chief minister Ali Amin Gandapur vowing to reach there at any cost.
Still on stories from West Asia, airstrikes were launched at several Yemeni cities, including capital Sana'a and port city Hodeidah. The strikes were carried out by the US and UK, and this according to the Houthi-run Al Masirah TV network. According to this network, loud explosions were heard around the cities, with 4 strikes on Sana'a and 7 on Hodeidah, and at least 1 hit Dharmar, which is a city situated south of the capital, and 1 hit Mukharis in the southeast of Sana'a. A large cloud of black smoke could be seen. Some residents stopped on the street, in the middle of the street, to take pictures and videos of the rising smoke. However, there was no immediate comment from the US or Britain on this attack. Now, since January, the United States and the United Kingdom have frequently attacked Houthi targets in Yemen. This in retaliation of the Houthis targeting ships in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Houthis claim that all these strikes, which have disrupted maritime traffic in a globally important waterway, it targets vessels which are linked to Israel and are intended to signal support with Palestinians during the war in Gaza. The latest strikes came a day after the Houthis said that they carried out a drone attack on Tel Aviv. The IDF said that it intercepted a suspicious aerial target of central Israel overnight without giving any further details on it.
We've just heard from President Emmanuel Macron of France calling for a halt in weapons sales to Israel. Now, France is not a major arms supplier to Israel. What did he mean? And is anyone listening?
Yeah, let's now do a little bit of a deep dive. Start with the first part you said, that France is not a major weapons supplier. That's the least you could say. Look, France, this whole policy is very starkly in contrast with the U.S. The U.S. gives 3.4 billion euros in military aid to Israel every year, and that's under a 10-year agreement that's regularly renewed. So we're talking billions for the U.S. France, last year, according to the latest Defense Ministry report, around 30 million euros, that's about $33 million, worth of military equipment exports to Israel. And what do they mean by that? Those were weapons that presumably, even though there were some missiles, offensive missiles, they were only intended, according to French officialdom, for defensive purposes, i.e. to be used as part of Israel's Iron Dome anti-missile air defense, not as offensive weapons to be used anywhere else. So there's the context there. France has a piddling amount of weapons that it officially says export weapons that it sends to Israel, and those are not offensive weapons. They are meant to be used for defensive purposes. Let that be as it may. What did he mean by this? What specifically was he talking about? Because it's not extremely clear. The comments, first of all, were made a few days ago. I believe it was October 1st. He gave this interview to the France Inter radio station. They were broadcast today, and they were broadcast at a time when, as we know, the entire region is braced for an expected, possibly hard, massive Israeli retaliation to last week's Iranian missile barrage that was aimed at Tel Aviv and elsewhere. So it comes in that context, but also it comes on a day when there are protests happening throughout Europe calling for stopping the war, specifically in Gaza. These remarks were specifically about Gaza, about French military aid to Israel with respect to its war against Hamas in Gaza. He did say at the end, as you mentioned, that he wants to avoid escalation. He doesn't want want Lebanon, he brought in Lebanon to this, which has been the latest front in Israel's war. He doesn't want Lebanon to become another Gaza. But this was specifically a broad call for an international arms embargo, that is, international players stopping their arms shipments to Israel, and specifically with respect to the Gaza theater of war, not to the Lebanon theater of war. France's official position being, and I have to underline official, is that they only have supplied until now weapons meant for defensive use, including in Israel's Iron Dome system. So a lot of people are going to be wondering, demanding answers, wondering what this is about, and also, yes, legitimate question, who's listening to Macron? Because right now Israel's made it clear that even the UN Secretary General is persona non grata right now in Israel. France and Europe have not had a big say, the least you can say, in weighing in on this conflict. Even the U.S. has been all but snubbed and ignored in the view of many observers of the region over the past year. So Macron's marks, yes, stark contrast to what we hear and see from the U.S. policy, but are they likely to sway in any way, shape, or form Israel's behavior or the outcome or the way this war is waged in the broader sense? Most likely not, an emphatic not.
I have a message for President Macron. Today, Israel is defending itself on 7 fronts against the enemies of civilization. We're fighting in Gaza against Hamas, those savages who murdered, raped, beheaded, and burned our people on October 7th. We're fighting in Lebanon against Hezbollah, the most heavily armed terror organization in the world, which was planning an even greater massacre than October 7th on our northern border, and that has rocketed Israeli towns and cities for nearly a year. We're fighting against the Houthis in Yemen and the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria that together have launched hundreds of drones and missile attacks against Israel. We're fighting against terrorists in Judea and Samaria who are trying to murder civilians in the heart of our cities. And we're fighting against Iran, which last week fired over 200 ballistic missiles directly at Israel, and which stands behind the 7-front war against Israel. As Israel fights the forces of barbarism led by Iran, all civilized countries should be standing firmly by Israel's side. Yet President Macron and some other Western leaders are now calling for an arms embargo against Israel. Shame on them. Is Iran imposing an arms embargo on Hezbollah, on the Houthis, on Hamas, and on its other proxies? Of course not. The axis of terror stands together. But countries who supposedly oppose this terror axis call for an arms embargo on Israel. What a disgrace. Well, let me tell you this. Israel will win with or without their support. But their shame will continue long after the war is won. For in defending ourselves against this barbarism, Israel is defending civilizations against those who seek to impose a dark age of fanaticism on all of us. Rest assured, Israel will fight until the battle is won, for our sake and for the sake of the peace and security of the entire world.
Russia has decided to remove Taliban from terror list. According to Russian state news agency TASS, Russia's foreign ministry said on Friday that a decision to remove the Taliban from a list of banned terrorist organizations has been taken at the highest level. In July, Russian President Putin had said that Russia considered Afghanistan's Taliban movement an ally in the fight against terrorism. Since Taliban seized power in Afghanistan in August 2021, Russia has been slowly building ties with the Taliban. No country has formally recognized the Taliban as the country's legitimate leadership, although China and the UAE have accepted its ambassadors. Russia added the Taliban to its list of terrorist organizations in 2003, and removing it would be an important step by Moscow towards normalizing relations with Afghanistan. The Taliban's acting foreign minister, Amir Khan Muttaqi, in a speech in Moscow, hailed recent decisions by Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan to remove the former insurgents from a list of banned groups. He also appreciated positive remarks by the high-ranking officials of the Russian Federation in this regard and hoped to see more effective steps soon. Speaking alongside Muttaqi, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow was convinced of the need to maintain pragmatic dialogue with the current Afghan government.